Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Spurs Up Show, presented by the Armchair All-Americans. I'm your host, Chris Phillips, joined as always with my co-host and my colleague, Thomas Floyd. We're continuing on in our season preview series, episode 54 of the Spurs Up Show, for those that are keeping count. But we're continuing our season preview series, talking about the South Carolina defense today in 2018. So we got a packed show. Also, we have a very special guest that joins us in another interview this week. Before we get to all that, if you're not subscribed yet, not sure what you're doing, the best Gamecocks podcast on the internet by far, please be sure to go online, rate, subscribe, share, and download the Spurs Up Show on iTunes, the Stitcher app, wherever you consume your media, wherever you get your podcast. Be sure to go online there and check us out. Also, follow us on all of our social media handles for all of our Armchair South Carolina related content, starting off with the Spurs Up Show. We're on Twitter at the Spurs Up Show. Pretty easy there. And then Armchair South Carolina is on Twitter at Armchair SCAR and on Instagram at Armchair SCAR as well. And lastly, like we mentioned earlier, this is a podcast presented to you by the Armchair All-Americans, armchairallamericans.com, localizing your sports coverage content. Please be sure to go check us out on armchairallamericans.com for all of your latest breaking Gamecock news, coverage, our podcast, of course, and also we cover everything from college to professional sports. Also doing stuff like esports. A lot of cool stuff happening over at armchairallamericans.com, so please be sure to go check us out there. So like I mentioned, I'm joined as always, like I always am, by my co-host Thomas Floyd. Tom, nice to have you back on the show, and I'm looking forward to talking some defense today.
It's great to be here. Seeing all the pictures of Carolina, the videos, and practicing just get me ready for game day.
Yeah. Obviously me and you are both familiar. I sent you a pretty funny text last night that I can't exactly repeat on the show, but yeah, it's safe to say I think we're pretty fired up for football. Obviously, first day of pads was today. We're recording this on August 7th, Tuesday night. So first day of pads was today. I mean, every time the pads get popping, I think that's when it kind of really feels like, okay, football is officially back. You've got preseason football for the NFL starting this week, official, like legitimate preseason, not some Hall of Fame game like we had last week. But really, really excited. We're actually going to, seeing as we are getting into the season, we're going to ditch our favorite news story of the week segment just because, you know what, I figure everybody's so ready for football. And when it comes to football, let's just jump right into it. Let's dive into it. Let's not delay it any more than we already have to. So we're going to jump right into it. Again, our season preview series, we're talking defense today. Will Muschamp's bread and butter. Taking a look back at 2017. The Gamecocks defense, very opportunistic a year ago, Tom, led the SEC with 28 takeaways. From that unit, you got 6 starters coming back. Some of the key losses from that unit, obviously, I'm going to start with the linebacker Sky Moore, who was one of just, I'm not sure how many players, but led South Carolina in tackles for all 4 years of his playing time, which is absolutely remarkable. You also lose DN Dante Sawyer, Jamarcus King at cornerback, 2 defensive tackles, and Ulrich Jones and Taylor Stallworth, Chris Lamons and DJ Smith from the safety position. So 4 of the top 7 and 7 of the top 12 tacklers are actually gone from a year ago. And then overall, from a pass rush perspective, which is something we're going to talk about a fairly good bit, Gamecocks had 26 sacks a year ago, which, was an improvement from the 2016 season, but still definitely not where this team wants to be. So just, Tom, I'll kind of ask you similar like I did last week, kind of knowing what you know. Obviously, we watched every single game and have studied and looked at the South Carolina defense 2017. With those losses, kind of take a look back at, kind of your impressions coming into 2018. Sort of what you're expecting and how you expect South Carolina to build off of. They've obviously gotten better from 16 to 17. Now we go to 18. Talk about kind of what they did in 17, how you think they're going to build off that.
I mean, I feel like our defense was like good in 2017, not great. I don't feel like there was any certain position area where they were dominant in, and I feel like this year they have a chance to do that, but I don't know really. I like the defense this year better than last year when you look at terms of depth and everyone across the board, but especially at the defensive back position, because you lose DJ Smith, but I hated watching DJ Smith play. I thought he was a horrible player. I mean, hate me if you want to for saying that. But, I mean, Ulrich Jones really not that big. Well, I mean, a guy who could plug holes, but, I mean, a guy that's replaceable. I mean, Sky Moore, you obviously don't replace. Dante Sawyer didn't have that big of an impact last year. I mean, that big of an impact. Chris Lamons is going to be hard to replace. Jamarcus King, Taylor Stallworth, all 3 of those guys, I think, going to be hard to replace. But other than that, I feel like I'm really confident in this defense. And really, if you look at what T-Rob and Muschamp have done with their defense the last 2 years, there's no reason to think they wouldn't improve.
Yeah, and I actually, you'll hear this later on in the show, but I asked Peter Burns, we were talking just about Will Muschamp and sort of his pedigree and what he's done at South Carolina. And, I asked him, is it naive of me, to think that South Carolina is going to be fine on deep when you take a look at this team as a whole? is it naive of me to think that South Carolina is going to be fine on defense simply because it's Will Muschamp, and he's proven time and time again, even in his first year in Columbia, when, I mean, you could argue the cupboard was pretty bare that first year. I mean, what he was taking over. Will Muschamp just finds a way. He's able to see things in guys. He's a great talent evaluator. Obviously, look at like a guy like DJ Wanham, who was a 3-star out of high school that I don't think really had a ton of big offers, that he's brought in and made an all-SEC caliber player. But what I asked Peter was, is it naive of me to think that just because South Carolina has the Will Muschamp effect, it's kind of a given, or is an assumption that they're at least going to be a solid defense. They may not be the best in the SEC. They may not lead the SEC with 28 takeaways again, but you know, I could argue, Tom, that really Will Muschamp, I mean, the biggest question this year going into the season, what's the offense going to do? Because to me, if Will Muschamp has proven one thing throughout his coaching tenure, is that he's going to field an elite level top of the line defense.
And I agree. I think that, you know, I think we talk about that stat a lot, that if his offense has scored more than 21 points, he's like 15-3 or something like that, something crazy. But I just think that if his defense can hold teams to 20 points or less a game, then we should be winning almost every game, if not having a really good chance of them. And I just don't – I mean, I look at the team from top to bottom. I think it has more talent this year than last year, and I think that they're going to play better than last year, even though I don't think the turnovers are going to be there like they were last year. But overall, as a unit, I think they will play a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of mentioned some of the guys that, you know, left from last year's team, which I'm not going to go through all of them again. But, you know, again, no hard feelings, no knock on them. If you want to take it that way, you know, sorry, not sorry about it. But there are some guys that I think South Carolina had to start a year ago simply because of inexperience, or, you know, those guys at least have experience. But I think they've got guys now who may be young, they may be freshmen, but they've got a much higher upside and have much more talent than the guys they're replacing. I think of just the safety position, like you mentioned, you know, with a guy like DJ Smith. I mean, same thing when Chris Moody left. I mean, it's kind of the same thing. You plug in, you get better players, and I think South Carolina has been able to do that. You know, taking a look at it position by position, want to talk about the defensive line starting off. Obviously, we know the pass rush is a big question for South Carolina. Only had 26 sacks a year ago. Talk about, Tom, I mean, do you think South Carolina, if you take a look right now at who they've got, I think their front four right now, or I know they're going to run probably a 3-man most of the time, but you got Javon Kinlaw in the middle, Kier Thomas is going to be in the middle. You've got a guy like Aaron Sterling, a guy like, sorry, I'm blanking, Aaron Sterling, and then Shameik Blackshear, going to be DJ Wanham, of course. I mean, I'm putting him a little bit more linebacker, buck type deal, which we're going to get to in just a second. But do you think South Carolina is going to be able to, in 2018, get a rush with just the front three or the front four guys they're going to have on the line?
I mean, I think with Kinlaw and Kier are going to be two really good defensive tackles for us this year. But I really think that the ability for us to get four people to affect the quarterback, I think it's really going to be on Shameik Blackshear. Is he going to be able to be that player he was supposed to be coming out of high school? And if he is, then yeah, I think that they're going to have a really good chance this year. But if not, they're probably going to have to blitz a lot more. I mean, obviously Shameik's one guy, but I think his impact on the team this year is going to be something that no one talks about. And that if he ends up with having 5 or 6 sacks this year, then that's going to be a great year for a guy that hasn't done much in his career at South Carolina. And when you talk about a guy like DJ Wanham, who's going to be someone they use to get to the passer, you know, had a bunch of passes batted down last year. I think I can't remember the exact number, but I just remember him making a bunch of plays in the backfield with as far as that. And I think that Javon too. I mean, you put a 6'6", 305 guy back there. You know, not many balls are going to get past that line of scrimmage. You know, if he puts his hand up, he might swat it about every time.
Hey, Tom, give me 1 second. I'm going to grab my charger. I'm just going to clip this part out, but I need to plug my computer in. Just 1 second. All right, that's the beauty of editing. So I'm just going to start back up. So, yeah, Tom, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, I think Javon Kinlaw is going to be an absolute beast on the inside. And, It's about time a guy like Shameik Blackshear kind of grew up and sort of grew into his own. I think we all, anyone that's followed South Carolina closely, we all know of kind of the problems he's had in his personal life and what he's kind of had to battle to get to where he is. I think it'd be a great story. Obviously, I know South Carolina fans would love to see it, but would be a great story to see a guy like Shameik Blackshear kind of break through. I think Aaron Sterling's a guy that South Carolina fans can be really, really excited about. Had a pretty solid freshman campaign. But, to me, it's going to be really interesting how those young guys do. Again, you got a lot of young talent on that team. I think Keir Thomas, again, I don't want to sleep on him. He's a guy I think should not be slept on. I mean, you see him in his reps. I mean, he's a guy that's put on some size, has got quickness, ability, sort of been a guy that maybe hasn't gotten all the attention on the South Carolina defensive line, but has made a big impact since 2016, which was his freshman season. I think he's a guy that could have a big year. But you talk about the youngsters behind him, kind of JJ and Ibarre. You talk about a guy like that who I think JJ and Ibarre is poised for a really, really big time year. You heard Lance Thompson today actually after practice say that he has the body type and the skill set of guys he's seen at the next level. So I think that's saying a lot. And again, I just think it's going to be really, really interesting to see because I think them being able to get a pass rush with just 4 or just 3 guys rushing. I mean, obviously, it's going to cover up, it's going to mask a lot of deficiencies you might have at corner, you might have at safety, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit. But I think that's going to be a key component to this defense is can they get a rush with just 4 guys rushing? And like I said, I think you got the pieces to do it. But like a lot of other parts of this defense, there's a little bit of youth there, a little bit of inexperience. And, Will Muschamp cited it again at SEC Media Days. He feels really good about his first 4, 5, 6 guys. But after that, it's a lot of guys with some talent, but guys that haven't done it yet. So I'm just really, really intrigued to see sort of how all that plays out. Talking about the pass rush, I wanted to separate the two, but Tom brought up a really good guy, obviously, in DJ Wanham. Want to talk about the linebackers a little bit, and I'm going to throw Buck in here as well because they sort of serve the same purpose. But talking about just kind of your back 4 guys, we'll just call them, as far as those guys in the front 7, you lose Sky Moore, which is obviously, I think, you mentioned, I think that's going to be a huge loss for any defense. You lose a guy like that, a leader. But I think T.J. Brunson's a guy that returned. He had 88 tackles a year ago. Really was leading the team in tackles all season before Sky Moore kind of took that reign. And I'm glad he did, obviously, to finish 4 years in a row as the leading tackler. But T.J. Brunson was a guy. He was right there all year. He was an impact player for South Carolina. He returns to that middle linebacker position. Bryson Allen Williams, he comes back after being injured in Game 3 last year. Will Muschamp talked about how big of a loss that was for them. Just to lose a guy like Bryson Allen Williams that, like you said, can rush the passer, can drop back into coverage. And, to me, you've got also Sherrod Green. Sherrod Green. Danny Fennell's back there as well. Eldridge Thompson. And then you throw in a freshman like Rosendo Lewis. Tom, I'm thinking the linebacker position for South Carolina, it may not be quite as deep as some others in the SEC or maybe as experienced, you could say. But I think it might be one of the more underrated groups in the SEC. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I'd say underrated. I think they're one of the more they're one of the question marks I don't think anyone's talking about. Because when you lose Sky Moore, it's a big loss, regardless of, he didn't get drafted, obviously, but he's playing ones right now on defense with the Colts. And you go from undrafted doing that, obviously shows how good of a college football player he was. Led the team 4 different years in tackles, 14 or 15 interceptions on his career. I can't think of which one, but I just think that, Rosendo Lewis is hurt right now. He's out. I think he's going to be fine, though, for the season. You look at Sherrod Green and Eldridge Thompson splitting reps to the dime, whatever. I think it's like diamond. That's his. But they call it something else too. I can't think of their name. But anyway, T.J. Brunson coming back from the linebacker is going to be a big help for us. A guy that's obviously contributed his freshman year, last year came into his own. Then you look at Bryson Allen Williams, a guy that I think has been in college football for 20 years and hasn't done really much South Carolina other than the last 2 years and making a play here or there. But I think if he has a big year off the edge and then covers it, South Carolina's linebacker corps will be one of the more respected, not underappreciated, respected linebacker corps in the SEC.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think this is the year for Bryson Allen Williams. He's been a solid player for South Carolina, but I don't know that he's had sort of that breakout season. I mean, you mentioned, I think we were talking about this last week or a couple weeks ago. I mean, you talk about the guys that were in either the 14 signing class or the 15 signing class, guys like Adante Sawyer and Bryson Allen Williams that were Army All-Americans that maybe just haven't lived up to that hype.
Yeah.
I mean, he's one of them. Again, he was an Army All-American. I mean, anytime you have a guy go to a game like that when he's a high school recruit, you're thinking this guy's going to come in, be a difference maker, be a stud. And like I said, he's had some good moments. I mean, he's made some big plays for South Carolina, but it just hasn't translated into a full season of him being like a dominant player. And maybe that's because he was next to Sky Moore the whole time. I mean, we can obviously attest to how big of an impact Sky Moore has because, you know, we watched South Carolina in 2016 without him when he sat out with a neck injury. And then we saw the difference in the defense a year ago and just how, I mean, he was the quarterback of the defense. Also, again, I want to throw in there and mention, and I don't want to forget, obviously, DJ Wanham. We didn't really talk about him. The D-line, obviously, with the linebackers, he's going to be at the buck position. I mean, DJ Wanham, there's not much you really need to say about this guy. I mean, he's so versatile. He can play on the line. He can play off the edge. He's a real physical, tough guy. I mean, you know, Will Muschamp, Lance Thompson today, they speak really high of him. I mean, for a good reason. He's a solid player. Again, he's a guy that Will Muschamp saw a ton of potential in, a guy he took a chance on. And, you know, I mean, Wanham has turned himself into an all-SEC caliber player, and I think he's going to have an all-SEC type season. But, yeah, I mean, if South Carolina is unable to get a pass rush from their front three or front four, and not only that, I think South Carolina is still going to blitz. They're going to bring pressure in creative ways because that's just really what Will Muschamp and T-Rob are known for doing. But I think you have some guys that are really capable of, you know, making life hell for a quarterback. You talk about Bryson Williams. You talk about DJ Wanham. Again, Brunson being in the middle. I mean, you know, you talk about I'm really excited for Rosendo Lewis. I know he's a true freshman. I'm not really sure, you know, quite how much he's going to play. But he's a guy they really talked about him as being a thumper. He's a guy that's got girth. He's a guy that when you look at the physicality of a linebacker in the SEC, he's really what you want. And I want to touch back. You know what? It's funny. I want to go backwards a little bit here because I completely forgot on the defensive line. I completely forgot to bring up Rick Sandage's name. I'm just sitting here thinking of freshmen. I think he's a guy too. I mean, the common theme I think with this defense we're going to touch on is there's just a lot of guys on this defense that I think are going to have some sort of impact. How big of an impact, we don't know, but it's just because of the youth and the experience. But there's a ton of talent as far as, you know, all the way across the board, from the defensive line to linebackers to the secondary. There's a lot of youth and inexperience that has a ton of talent that's going to be asked to do a lot pretty quickly. But I think a linebacker core of, like you said, TJ Brunson in the middle, Bryson Allen Williams, Sherrod Green, and Danny Fennell, with DJ Wanham playing in the buck. I think that's a pretty solid second level for the Gamecocks, even with the loss of Sky Moore. Moving into the secondary, you want to talk about the corners a little bit, obviously. Rashad Fenton returns for his senior season. You know, you could argue Rashad Fenton was maybe the best corner in the SEC for about half of the season last year. Struggled a little bit down the stretch, but he returns for his senior year. Is definitely a guy South Carolina can count on. Is like, again, I think he's going to be a top-of-the-line corner in the SEC. From there, it's going to be some new guys. You know, Jamarcus King leaves, but you've got Keyshawn Nixon, who was a nice piece last year, played some really good football. I think the coaching staff's really high on him. You also add a transfer in Nick Harvey, the Texas A&M transfer, a guy that I think just adds depth. I think he could see immediate playing time. I mean, T-Rob said it yesterday. I mean, Nick Harvey's played in some big football games. He's played some meaningful football. So I think Nick Harvey's a guy that's going to be, you know, huge for them. You know, you talk about some of these youngsters, Israel McQuamu, J.C. Horn, guys like that. And then, you know, when we start getting in the secondary, obviously, you know, different positions, you know, we'll talk about kind of the nickel and, you know, who's playing different safety, stuff like that. But, you know, talk about Tom kind of, again, you lose Jamarcus King, but I think it is kind of another situation where as much as King did for you, you bring in a kid with less experience, but it may actually be an upgrade on that other side, on that other corner, just from a talent perspective. Talk about kind of your impressions of the South Carolina defensive backs, or the cornerbacks, if you will, specifically coming into the fall.
Well, I mean, you look at, you know, bringing in Nick Harvey, I think he's more talented than Jamarcus King was. I mean, I could be wrong there. I don't think he's as big, but I think he's a better cover corner probably, and only has 1 year to play. And I think that having Nick Harvey and Rashad Fenton basically teach Mook and J.C. Horn how to play cornerback is going to be huge. I think those two could be two shutdown corners for South Carolina. I think that, you know, maybe in 2019, those guys could be the two best, you know, best combo in the SEC when you look at them. But I think, you know, with Fenton and Nick Harvey, I think they're going to be the two guys starting on opposite corners, with Keyshawn in the slot, and then having Jemias at safety, and then Stephen Montag probably lower safety. I think we're going to have some really good DBs this year, but it's going to be, can they have depth, and can the freshmen play well? Because if the freshmen can't play well, then it's going to be a lot of the same people playing over and over again.
Yeah, and I think the good news for South Carolina is too, and this goes not just the corner position, but the safety position and the nickel, which we're about to talk about in just a second. But I'm a pretty big believer that football, it's a lot easier to play football as a true freshman the farther away you get from the ball. And what I mean by that is if you're a center, if you're an offensive lineman, if you're a quarterback, you're a defensive lineman, for different reasons, this, that, or the other, it's it's much more difficult to take on the responsibilities of someone that's in that position versus being a cornerback or being a safety. I'm not trying to lighten the load of what a corner has to deal with or a safety, but I think even if you're young, you can get away with playing the corner of the position or anywhere in the secondary or being a wide receiver by just being an athlete. I think your athleticism at some point takes over because when you, like I said, when you get close to the ball as a quarterback, it's all about knowing the playbook. It's all about, experience in hostile environments. When you're on the offensive or defensive line, it's about, are you physically developed to even play in the league yet? Most guys don't come out of high school, ready to start 13 games, 12, 13, 14, 15 games of college football. So I feel good about it in that sense for South Carolina, that I'm not too worried about having to play some young guys because these guys are highly, highly touted freshmen, and a lot of them were on the field in the spring. They've gone through it already. But again, you look at a guy like, I think J.C. Horn's going to be an immediate impact. I think Israel Okamu, the 6'4" defensive back, he's going to be an immediate impact. It's going to be funny to see McQuamu and Jamias Williams stand next to each other. But yeah, I just think, again, I think Keyshawn Nixon can be a nice player. And we talked about him a couple shows ago about what are you really expecting out of Keyshawn Nixon? And again, I think the coaching staff is fairly high on him. From what we've seen from other receivers, they say he's one of the hardest to go up against in practice. So, I mean, we have no reason not to believe that. I'm going to take Brian Edwards' word over anybody else's. So I think overall, as far as the corners are concerned, I think South Carolina is going to be okay on the perimeter. I think they're going to be okay with a chance to be really, really good. I mean, I think, again, Rashad Fenton is going to be the leader of them, and I think he can be one of the best corners in the SEC. And again, Nick Harvey seems to be kind of the wild card. I mean, what is he really going to bring you from Texas A&M? But again, it's a guy that has played in the conference, played in the SEC. So you have to feel confident in that. So moving into the rest of the secondary, want to talk about safety, a little bit of nickel, obviously, of course, but want to talk mainly about the safety position. I mean, this is a position that's been an area of concern for Will Muschamp and the staff. They've mentioned it countless times over the preseason, just talking about, Stephen Montack is the only guy that returns, and he's obviously a really, really nice piece. He's a very versatile player. He can play corner. He can play the slot. He can play safety. He can play nickel. He can play really anything, I think, in the secondary. But Stephen Montack, I thought he did a really good job at secondary last season. He returns this year. A guy that we didn't mention with the corners that is moving to safety is Jamias Williams, which I think is probably the biggest story of the safety position, is what Jam Williams is going to do. I think it's going to be a really natural, smooth transition for him. I think this is going to be a better fit for him as far as a natural position. I had this chat with Michael Felder on our show last week, and I think the biggest thing for Jam Williams is how is he going to adjust to maybe not being involved in every single play. That can be tough for a guy to adjust to. When a guy has the type of talent and the skill level he has, he wants to be in every play. But I'll stop right there and I'll ask you, Tom, talk about because I feel like there's probably some of this here. What is your excitement level for seeing Jamias Williams move to the back end of the defense and man the safety position?
I mean, I think he's a ball hawk. I mean, the Gig and Paul, obviously, you saw him make plays last year with his interception against Missouri, and then you could tell that he has an eye for the ball when he made that pick against Florida. I think that putting him at safety is going to be better for him because he's going to be in less man-to-man situations where he has to cover a 6'4" T. Higgins in the slot sometimes. But I just think that he's aggressive. He plays hard. I mean, tackling won't be an issue with him. I just think that it's a really smart move by bunch of everything. I think that he's going to be an NFL safety. I think he's as close as Earl Thomas as we've seen at South Carolina. He's as close to DJ Swearinger that we've seen in South Carolina. I think that's the level of talent he brings to that position.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think he's an absolute ball hawk too. He was a kid that was, compared to Tyrann Mathieu when he was on the recruiting ranks when he was in high school. He has that sort of ball hawking ability. It's funny you bringing up the DJ Swearinger, the DJ Swearinger comparison makes me think of Jonathan Gibson, who's a kid who's a freshman this year that may have an impact at the safety position. But, moving into the guys that we know coming back, I'm excited to see Jalen Dickerson and Taven Jackson. Taven Jackson getting moved to the safety position, and Will Muschamp cited it simply for depth. It's, we need bodies back there. We need some guys with some talented guys back there. And I think they made the decision to move Taven Jackson to the back end. But two guys who have battled injuries. I mean, we've mentioned it countless times on this show. Tom, you've talked about, Will Muschamp had extremely high praise for Jalen Dickerson, calling him like one of the best safeties he'd ever coached. when the kid hadn't even played a game yet. Said he reminded him of, I forget exactly who, maybe it was Earl Thomas or something like that.
Earl Thomas.
Yeah, reminded him of Earl Thomas, which I mean is extremely high praise. But again, Jalen Dickerson, a guy who's battled injuries, Taven Jackson, they both battled injuries, and the guys that are both going to get on the field this fall. I'm really, really excited to see them actually on the field and contributing. Because again, you hear so much about these guys, and I mean Will Muschamp was extremely high on both of them going into the season last year, and unfortunately injuries cut their season short. Then you also add in JT eBay. I think it's eBay. I'm not sure if it's eBay or I. I think it's JT eBay. We're gonna say JT eBay. The Rice transfer, you had him add him in over. I think he's a little bit of a wild card as well. It's going to be interesting to see. He's actually battling a hip. I don't think supposed to hold him out very long, but obviously the quicker you can get him back, the better. Because I think maybe what may be the biggest transition for him is just learning kind of the lingo and kind of the way South Carolina works on defense. They actually talked about that with Nick Harvey at corner, just saying that they do a lot of the similar things, but it's just a lot of different verbiage, a lot of different language. So overall, Tom, obviously I would say this is the biggest question mark on the South Carolina defense. This is going to be the biggest area of concern. How concerned are you for the South Carolina defense at the safety position going into the season?
I mean, I just think it depends on how the new kids play. When you look at, I'm confident in Montague, confident in Williams, but how can Jalen Dickerson play? How can JT eBay play? How can Taven Jackson play? If they can provide quality depth and come in and play meaningful snaps and play them well, then I have full confidence that they're going to have a good year at safety. If not, then it's Montague and Jemias playing the entire time with no help. And it's probably going to be a long year. And you look like a guy, Javon Charleston, no clue if he's going to be back yet. Something, he could have added some quality depth to the safety position, but I just it does worry me right now in terms of depth. But if those young guys can come in, along with the grad transfer of eBay, come in and play well, then full confidence they're going to have a good year back there.
Yeah, I'm just so intrigued because when a guy gets that high of praise and that much – the endorsement that Jalen Dickerson and Taven Jackson have got, especially Jalen Dickerson, I mean, it makes me like, okay, we need to see this kid. I need to see this kid on the field. What has he got? He's got something because Will Muschamp doesn't just hand out compliments to anybody about their playing ability. And I mean, I think it's going to be really interesting. I mean, I think it's definitely, it's a question mark. It's an area of concern for the South Carolina defense. I think luckily one of the biggest things probably that's going to help this South Carolina team, this South Carolina defense, I don't, with all due respect to Coastal Carolina, you open up with a fairly easy game week one. You don't play like an NC State or any of these kickoff games for the first time in forever, which we're going to break down the schedule in a couple of weeks, and you'll know just how happy I am about that. But you open up with a fairly easy game in week one. You face Georgia in week two. I know they got a lot of talent. And they bring back some good receivers, but I don't think they're a team that's going to challenge you down the field and vertically as much as some of these other teams. I think they're more of a pro style. They're going to run the football, work off of play action. Week 3, you play Marshall, which, granted, I don't know a ton about Marshall, but should be a game where, again, basically the point I'm getting to here is you got some time for these guys to kind of feel their ways through, especially in the secondary, with an offense that's just going to go high flying down the field, probably until you face Missouri, which I think is in like week 6, I believe. I think you go Marshall, then you go Kentucky Vandy on the road, and then you got Missouri. So, I mean, this South Carolina defense, that's the one good thing I think as far as the secondary is concerned. They're not, you're not playing some high-flying, pass-happy offense like, say, our friends over at Ole Miss are playing week 1 when they play Texas Tech. So I think these guys at the safety position, you got a lot of talent there. And like I said, all of the secondary, those guys are going to kind of have time to grow into those roles and, obviously get better and get some game reps and get some game experience. I think it's going to be absolutely huge, going to be beneficial. But, yeah, they're going to have to grow up quick. I mean, the biggest thing to me is, again, going back to it, I think Jam Williams is set out for a breakout year. I don't see any reason to why you wouldn't expect. I think Jam Williams is a guy that just is not being talked about enough. Was all, freshman all SEC a year ago. We obviously saw his capabilities, his abilities a year ago, and I think that's going to be maximized this season when we see him in the back there just being a ball hawk, kind of being naturally what he is. So really, really should be a lot of fun to watch. Okay, so we're going to go with the defense, or through the defense. We're going to say why they'll be better, why they'll be worse. We wanted to do this last week. We had a little bit of technical issues at the end of our show, so we apologize. But I want to talk about just overall 2018, Tom, this 2018 defense. I'll let you start here. Why, if they are, why will South Carolina's defense, in your opinion, be better in 2018?
I think that there's a lot of quality freshmen that can contribute early to South Carolina. I know when you look at 2016 with DJ Wanham and TJ Brunson, there was really only two players that came in and could just play to start with. You look at this year from this recruiting class, you have guys like Israel Mukwamu, J.C. Horn, Rick Sanders, J.J. Nogbury, who are all – that's four different guys who probably all can contribute on defense alone. And I just think that them bringing in extra depth and quality snaps to the defense is going to be something that South Carolina hasn't had in a long time in terms of the amount of depth the freshman class is bringing in. I think that if Israel Mukwamu and J.C. Horn can both learn from Rashad Fenton and Nick Harvey, then they can be, two shutdown guys for us next year. You have on one side J.C. Horn, who's a freak, and then Mukwamu, who's 6'4", and then you look at Rick Sanders and J.J. Nogbury, guys that probably your two future starting defense tackles over Javon Kinlaw and Kier Thomas. And I just think, but all four of those guys, if they can contribute early and contribute well, then we're going to have a really good season on defense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well put, well put. And I'll say for me, I think while South Carolina's defense will be better in 2018, to me, we've talked about a lot of different guys, but I think a guy that Will Muschamp mentioned him for good reason is the return of Bryson Allen Williams. Again, Bryson Allen Williams only played in about really 2.5 games a year ago, got hurt played in 2 games, 1.5 games. He got hurt week 2 against Missouri, So he only played in 2 games a year ago, got hurt against Missouri. I thought through 2 weeks a year ago had a really, really big impact, had a huge sack in the NC State game, had some big plays in that one where the South Carolina defense came up with a lot of big turnovers. Week 2 against Mizzou, he had the pick off the Javon Kinlaw tip pass at the end of that game. So Bryson Allen Williams was making a very, very big impact through 2 weeks, and I think getting him back, he's a guy can be a veteran. He's a guy that can really, really have a breakout year. I think it's about time for Bryson Allen Williams. He's set for that breakout year, and I think it's going to come this year. So I think his return is going to make this defense overall as a whole. It's maybe going to give them that pass rushing piece they didn't have a year ago. And I think it's going to really change this defense and the dynamic of it in 2018. Okay, so we talked about why they'll be better. Let's talk about why they might be worse. I'll start here, Tom. Really why I think South Carolina might be worse off than they were in 2017 and 2018 is the simple question: can a team really? Those that listen to that show, Felder, we talked about that a little bit. He talked about how turnovers are not just obviously we listen to coaches' interviews and they preach, especially South Carolina's coaches. If you watch any of those post-practice interviews, they preach we talk the ball. The ball is our culture. Getting the ball out is our culture. Lance Thompson even said today, hey, they asked him, how much do you talk about turnovers and getting the ball? He said, hey, do you read the Bible every day? Our Bible is turnovers. That's what we talk about every single day. He had high praise for T-Rob that said, he's never been anywhere that teaches getting the ball and turnovers better than South Carolina. I think that's absolutely fantastic. But at some point, you had 28 a year ago. If you have to depend, if you're going to be a bend but don't break defense and you have to depend on those turnovers, can you really make a living off of doing that? Because you could argue South Carolina may not have won Louisiana Tech. They had that big turnover, that pick in the end zone. But have a bunch of turnovers come your way. And not every single turnover, again, is a skill play. It is just being in the right place at the right time and making a play. Again, give all the credit in the world to Will Muschamp, his South Carolina defense, their entire coaching staff, what they preach, what they do. But at some point, again, you need to, I guess, be maybe a little bit more efficient and not so much live and feed off of those turnovers.
Chris, you there?
Yep.
I could, for some reason, my thing went out. You asking me what my thing on the defense was?
Yeah, I'll just start over.
Just cut that part out.
I got you. All right. So, Tom, what's your take on as far as what do you think would be the one reason if South Carolina were maybe worse than they were in 2017 on defense? What's the one thing that's going to maybe hold them back in 2018?
I would say losing Sky Moore. I know that. I mean, he was a really great player for South Carolina. Probably one of the top, at least I would say, 3 linebackers in South Carolina history. I mean, would that be a fair thing to say?
Yeah, no, I would without a doubt think so. I think any team would be impacted losing a guy like Sky Moore. I just think you can't help it. I mean, look at the Georgia defense. I think they're going to have an impact, or it's going to take a toll on them losing Roquan Smith, and it's just because it's not because they don't have capable bodies behind him, but when you lose a guy like that, it's probably going to take some sort of a toll on your defense. And I think that's a fair statement for sure.
And Sky Moore, along with South Carolina's played in the bend don't break defense for the last couple of years. When you look at NC State, the NC State game last year, I think they doubled us in yards, but we won by a touchdown. That's just because of so many clutch interceptions or plays in the end zone where teams would drive down on us, but they wouldn't be able to convert in the end zone. And we look when we play really good teams like Georgia and Clemson, teams that can convert in the end zone, teams usually get beat by. And I think that this year they're going to have to be more dominant when it comes to field position and getting out of the game on third down. I think that's going to be a big deal this year that no one's talking about.
Yeah, I know third down has definitely been a huge focus for them and something they've preached about a lot. They have to be better on. Obviously, South Carolina, you mentioned they were phenomenal a year ago in red zone defense, and I have to say I expect that to continue just because I think that is a huge point of emphasis for them, and I think that's something Will Muschamp preaches a ton to his defense is winning the red zone. But yeah, no, you make some great points for sure. Okay, put you in the spot, Tom. We're going to talk. I'm going to let you start. Let's just say it's January, it's February of next year. Just give me your overall prediction for 2018. How do you see it sort of playing out for this defense? What are you expecting, and what do you think we're going to say about this defense when we look back after the 2018 season's completed?
I think that it's a top 4-ish SEC defense. I think they're going to have a really good year. I think it's going to be sort of similar to last year in terms of give up a lot of yards, but don't really give up that many scoring. Letting people get on the board. I think they're going to force a lot of field goals. I think they're going to, clutch. I guess that will be the right term. Be to clutch up in their red zone and make sure they make the right plays. And I think run defense is somewhere that they're going to be better at this year than they were last year. And I think that pass defense too. I think they're going to prove. They're improving every year, and I think this year is going to be the same thing. I think they're going to be a better team than last year. I think they're going to be. I don't know if they're going to be up to, anywhere there's 11-2 team defense. I don't think they're going to be there, but I think they're going to take a good step towards that goal of having a dominant defense people are scared to play.
Yeah. Tom, my prediction for 2018, I'll just say 3 words. Trust in Muschamp. I'm giving Will Muschamp the benefit of the doubt here. Like I told you before, I think Will Muschamp, he's done it time and time again, every stop he's been at, maybe, from Florida to now. I think South Carolina, there might be some bumps and bruises along the way, but I think, again, not having quite as tough a schedule early on as maybe they have had in past years and not being tested maybe so much vertically as they would have been tested in past years, I think it's going to, benefit those guys in the section. I think South Carolina is just going to continue to improve. And, again, I'm giving Will Muschamp the benefit of the doubt, and I think South Carolina is going to have no worse than a top half of the conference defense. And who knows? I think it could be a top 3 defense in the SEC. I don't think they'll get quite at 28 turnovers, but I continue that to be a huge focus for the South Carolina defense. They preach day in and day out, and I think that's something that's sort of ingrained in his guys, and that's sort of that's the culture he's built at South Carolina on defense is, keep the ball away from your opponent and take the ball away from them when they have it. So I think it'll be a lot of fun to watch, but I think this is just going to be another step, like you said, in the right direction of South Carolina having a truly dominant defense, kind of getting back to what they had in the, between 2010, 2013, kind of the glory years, you could say, for South Carolina. So, but that's pretty much going to wrap it up. Again, if you guys have any feedback, any questions in regards to any of our comments on the defense, feel free to reach out to us, any of our social media accounts. Leave us your feedback. We obviously really, really appreciate it. But for now, we're going to jump into Tom. You got any more comments, anything on the defense as far as maybe something we might have missed or something that's on your mind?
I think they're going to have a good year. I don't think anybody isn't expecting them to have a good year, but I think that they could, I think Nick Harvey is a guy that if he can come in and have a really great year for South Carolina, he could put our defense over the top and maybe put us in SEC championship play. Yeah.
No, I agree. It's going to be those new guys are going to be the difference between South Carolina, I think, being a good, solid defense and being a great, scary defense. So should be a lot of fun to watch. For now, we're going to say bye to you guys. For Thomas Floyd, I'm going to send it over. We got a really special interview with Peter Burns of SEC Network. We talk a little bit about South Carolina's prospects going into 2018. Will Muschamp. Boy, our interview with Peter Burns right here.